In this section, we'll talk about how to solve absolute value equations. So I'll go through the process in just a moment, but first let's just look at these examples, which should be pretty straightforward, and I imagine you guys can basically do these in your head. So just to remind you of how absolute values work. So if we want to solve the equation, the absolute value of x equals 3, remember that the absolute value of a constant comes out as positive. So if we take the absolute value of -1, it equals +1. Absolute value of +1 equals +1 also, right? So if we're imagining what x could equal inside the absolute value symbols there, we could put in for x either a -3 or a +3, right? And those would both satisfy that equation. Absolute value of -3 would equal +3. And the absolute value of +3 would also equal +3, right? So there are two solutions, x equals -3 or x equals +3. If we go to solve x, absolute value of x equals 6, same deal. If we plug in -6 or +6 for x, when we take the absolute value of either of those constants, those would come out as a +6, right? Now, if we go to solve absolute value of x equals -6, if we're imagining what we could put inside the absolute value sign to make this a true statement, the answer is nothing. Can the absolute value of a number ever be negative? Are there any solutions to this equation? Since the absolute value of a constant of a number can't be negative, there are no solutions to this equation. So just keep that in mind. If you ever have an absolute value equals a negative constant with a variable inside the absolute value, then you have no solution. There's no way to make that equation work. Okay, so now that we've seen these simpler examples, in general, our process for solving an absolute value equation is first, make sure that you've isolated your absolute value. You see me say isolate a lot when we're solving equations. Isolate the thing that you're working on or working with. So we'll isolate the absolute value if necessary. And then the second step is you're going to set up two equations to solve. And this isn't, proper math notation here, but we have the absolute value of whatever's inside the absolute value equals our constant on the right side of the equation. Sometimes there could be a variable over there. So whatever's inside, we're going to set that first equal to just the constant itself or whatever's on the right side of the equation. So keep the sign positive. Or we can set the inside of the absolute value equal to the negative of whatever's on the right side of that equation. So as an example, if we take a look at absolute value of x minus 1 equals 3, that x minus 1 is what's inside the equation, right? So the x minus 1, is inside the absolute value. So I'm going to take what's inside and set it both equal to +3 and equal to -3. So first, we get this equation, x minus 1 equals +3. Then we can set up the second equation, x minus 1 equals -3. And we solve each of these separately, adding 1 to both sides. I get x equals 4 over here, x equals -2 over here. So we have two solutions, x equals 4 or x equals -2. And you can do a quick check to make sure that these work. 4 minus 1 inside the absolute value would equal 3. And -2 minus 1 inside the absolute value also equals 3. All right, so one thing I want to warn you about is a lot of students kind of abuse these absolute values. So make sure that you don't do anything that's mathematically unsound here. So we have the absolute value of x minus 1. And I've seen students mistakenly change that x minus 1 into an x plus 1 when they set up these two equations. And I know your logic is, well, absolute values make things positive, right? But it makes constants positive. If you plug in a negative constant into an absolute value, it will come out positive. But that's not true for an algebraic expression like x minus 1. Okay, so we can't just convert that minus sign into a plus sign, so be aware of that. That would not be correct, and that would totally mess up your whole answer, okay? So keep whatever's inside intact. You set that equal to the positive or negative right side of the equation. All right, number 12. So our first step here, absolute value of x plus 2, then minus 5 equals 9. Our first step would be to isolate our absolute value. So here I have absolute value of x plus 2 equals 14. And then from there, I'm going to take what's inside and set up my two equations. My first equation will be x plus 2 equals positive 14. My second equation, what's inside x plus 2 equals negative 14. And then I subtract 2 from both sides to solve each of these equations. So that'll give me x equals 12 or x equals negative 16. Okay. So after I isolate the absolute value, the expression in the absolute value bars must be equal to positive 14 or negative 14. I'll make a note that that's after isolating the absolute value. And that's why I chose to set each equation equal to positive 14 and negative 14.